welcome to the NKD podcast. I'm Rachel Kaliisa, the Business Development Manager at NKD, and I'll be hosting this conversation with our wonderful guest today. NKD is an employee engagement agency, and we support all things employee engagement for many companies across the globe. But we understand the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we champion this and we try to amplify this with all of the organizations we work for. And we're hoping that this conversation today can spark something new within you that you can go ahead and share with your leaders and with your teams. So let's introduce our wonderful guest. We have Rob Neil here with us today. OBE, we must make sure we have the right accolades. And you are the director at Krystal Alliance. So welcome. You have quite the CV. So we'd love to delve into it, but you spent 38 years in the civil service, and that was before you then ventured off to do your own consultancy. And little birdie tells me you wrote a book this year, so it'd be great to hear a bit more about your journey and how you managed to get to this point.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks for all of that, and thanks for having me.
You're
it's
welcome.
Wonderful to be here. Wow, yeah. When you hear those milestones, you hear those digits, you hear the fact that for the first time I've had some work published. It's a co-written book. If I start with that, it's called The Key to Inclusion. It's out of the wonderful stable that is included.com. It's edited by the CEO there, Steve Frost. He's the former lead on diversity and inclusion for the 2012 Olympics. No less. And he's got a wonderful team of which I'm a part. And he invited me along with 4 others to explore the prospect of bringing together our thoughts, collective thoughts on what would be the key or the keys to inclusion. And through those early conversations, just over a year ago now, I emerged with the pen in my hand around cultural intelligence. And if this podcast was to segue into talks about cultural intelligence and CQ, I would be splashing around like a pig in muck to have that conversation. But if I attach my response to your question around my time in the civil service, yes, it was almost 4 decades, closer to 4 than 3, a total of 38 years. I was aiming for 4 decades, but circumstances just came about which led to me naturally letting go of what I call my beloved civil service. I enjoyed every year there. There were moments that were turbulent, but only moments. I enjoyed my time more than I can express in a podcast because it left me with so much. I joined at such a young age, but I now steer at 60. I'm 58 years old. I know it's...
You look amazing!
Isn't it? It's the lighting. It's the lighting around this place. But no, I'm 58 now with as much energy as I've ever had around the issues of equality or equity, diversity and inclusion, and I want to work with and support organisations that are serious about being more inclusive. And if I've picked up anything along the way, if I enjoy any kind of privilege, it is the privilege at this time of my life to be working with those that I want and choose to work with, and that's what I'm exercising. It's that privilege.
Yeah, which is wonderful. And you mentioned about the sort of the cultural education side, which I think is almost this next step after we've gotten over the initial hurdle of, hello, we need to get, a diverse array of talent in the door. Moving on then to equity and making sure that you are, catering to different people, different needs, and then inclusion, making people feel welcome at the table. And it's quite the journey, but then that extra layer is that cultural piece.
Well, I love the way you put that, because the cultural education, some people talk about cultural awareness, cultural competence. You've introduced that thought, cultural education. It's all in the ballpark. And I think what cultural intelligence offers us, CQ, is a researched, developmental, not remedial, developmental tool that kind of almost extends the legacy of IQ and EQ,
yes.
Intelligent quotient and emotional intelligence to then give us this wonderful playground that we can all be a part of, where we actually understand, not just sympathise, but empathise with our wonderful differences and that which we have in common.
Yes.
Because too often I think the agenda ends up focusing on the difference, but in a very aggressive way, rather than appreciating that difference is good and that we have so many things in common.
Yes.
Our shared hopes and aspirations as human beings.
Yes.
And that's what I love about cultural intelligence.
Yeah, and it's wonderful because you're right, it's that, understanding that we actually share a lot more than we thought. And it was my colleague that said to me, I'm reading this book, I think you'd find it interesting. She's Portuguese, and she introduced me to the culture map.
Ah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that discusses, cultural differences in the workplace and how it shows up.
Yeah.
And actually, we both shared that, in our cultures, different as they are, actually this rule around waiting for someone to finish speaking before you contribute, we have in common.
Yeah.
And we shared, the challenges that come up as a result of that cultural difference, and, being in spaces where the dominant majority is completely different to what you were raised by.
Something you've just said reminds me actually of a couple of things said by Maya Angelou, the famous, she's still with us in so many ways, but sadly no longer alive. But Maya Angelou, and Still I Rise, she talks about the fact that we are far more alike than we are unalike.
Yes.
And she also talks about the precious gift of rhythm and rhythm in conversation. You've just alluded to it, by waiting for that pause or waiting for that moment, that invitation to then contribute.
Yes.
And she emphasises the importance of rhythm in all that we do. And I love her for that. And I was truly blessed to be able to not just see her perform, but meet her when she performed. I know.
Oh my
goodness. I know. I still have to pinch myself. I still have to. But it was at the Shaw Theatre, not a million miles from where we are right now, recording this podcast. And she sang, she danced, and then she was kind enough to. I'm talking about a handshake, but that that's enough. I've shaked hands with Maya Angelou.
Yeah.
That's enough for me.
That's incredible.
And Still I Rise.
I love that. So poignant and so beautiful. So what is the key to inclusion? It's the title of your book?
It's the title of the book.
Yeah. So what, throughout your experience, I'm sure you've had many experiences. What was the key?
I think the key, if you're asking me personally, cultural intelligence will always be in the mix. That's my contribution to the book. And so I would say that, wouldn't I? But there are 4 other fantastic writers who've contributed to this offering, this gift. And it is, and I would say this, it is a fantastic book. But I think what each of the contributions have in common is this, and it's quite popular now, but and some may take it in another direction, but it is about this feeling of safety in the workplace.
Yes.
Of what some term psychological safety, of what people talk about in having safe spaces. And there are some fantastic people doing work in this space to help us create, curate, and actually establish safe spaces in the workplace. Yeah. I like to extend the notion of safe space to talk about gracious spaces. As someone who happens to walk in faith, I do like reaching for those words that talk about spirit and talk about the humanity of what we do. We're none of us machines. At times we may want to feel as though we are churning work out. But I think when we look at our ways of leading that include compassion, leave room and invite love into the conversation, I think so much more becomes possible, and not least of which is the creation of safe spaces. Those spaces that we are free from chastisement. We can run with an idea, even if it's completely left field and wacky, with knowing that there's no telling off coming at the end of it if it doesn't work.
Yes.
Because of course it might work, or it might lead to something that works. And so if history teaches us anything, is that the greatest ideas often come from left field that weren't in our range of thinking when we started out, but by trying it, just trying it, we know that something else is possible at the other end. And if we can do better at that, if we can do more of that, I think will create more efficient and just better workplaces, more engaged employees in the workforce. And that's what we're after, I think.
Yeah, and it's about, as you mentioned, bringing that humanity to work. I think, in times past, I speak to my parents, some of my older cousins, and they talk about a workforce that was just, you don't bring your humanity to work.
Yeah.
You're just kind of a body. You're there to do a job.
You're a number.
You're a number. And I feel like I experienced that as well. So it's not something that completely disappeared as I got into the workforce. But I'm realizing more now, people are having this conversation. Who are you?
Yeah.
And, there's this notion of bringing your full self to work. But some people don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So it's about bringing the self that you want to present.
Absolutely.
That's still authentic to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But have you ever had moments where you felt you struggled to bring your full self or your, humanity into the workplace? And how did you navigate that, particularly as you champion inclusion?
Sure.
But did you find that you were having these conversations, but also still having to face challenges?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Rachel. I mean, it's a great question because it has me focus, and it reminds me of some of the turbulence I went through growing up in the civil service. But certainly back then, 4 decades ago, there wasn't the kind of encouragement to even gentle invitation to bring your authentic self into work anyway. No. However, whatever amount of that you wanted to bring in, it was more about you come to work. You literally, the mantra, Rachel, at the time was you leave your problems at the door.
Oh, definitely.
That was the mantra. And, I can remember it very well. I only have to look at my scars to remind myself that I went through that. I can remember wrestling with it. I can remember being challenged by it. I can remember, wanting to, and to this day, still signing my emails off with 2 words, stay strong. And being told by older and more senior, more experienced civil servants to stop that. You won't get on if you do that. I can remember Rachel being, and still am, quite a demonstrative soul. I love a hug. I'm quite tactile.
I'm a hugger.
And for me, it doesn't take much of an introduction for me to either end that introduction with or require of that introduction a hug. And I was told that wasn't becoming of a civil servant. Now, there are obvious reasons for that. And, post-COVID even, we need to be somewhat sensitive to how people prefer to be in their space.
Yes.
But I'm just letting you know what my preferences are and how I wrestled with some of that in my life and my journey as a civil servant. But if you extend and extrapolate some of that, so the language we use, there were times when I literally had to think about how I was communicating myself, whether it be by letter, as it was early days, or indeed by email that was to follow. I had to think about how I dressed going into work. And not just because I was in court, and I was a court clerk for nearly 5 years, but that came with its own set of rules, and you understood those rules. But actually, whether you needed to wear a tie every day as a man in the office, I was amongst the first to actually loosen the tie and then get rid of the tie by demonstrating it really added nothing to one's performance at all. So that was a turning point.
Yeah.